Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about my least favorite couples in science fiction and fantasy. Last week, in honor of Valentine's Day, I did a video about my favorite couples in fantasy and science fiction, and I did float the idea of doing this video, and a couple people said that they'd like to see it. So I didn't want to do it last week because it just felt like kind of bad karma to make a video about least favorite romances on the week of Valentine's Day. But now that that's all passed, I thought it would be a fun video to do this week instead. I decided that I had to give myself some ground rules for this one, so I'm not going to be talking about any romances or couples from series that I just plain don't like, because I feel like I'm sure there are plenty of books that just didn't work for me where it would be super easy to use those as examples of romances or couples that I thought weren't great or that I didn't really enjoy reading because, I didn't enjoy reading the book. So for this video, I'm only going to talk about series that I at least basically enjoyed. They're not all favorite series or favorite books or favorite authors, but there's nothing on here that I just straight up didn't enjoy reading. Just like my video of favorites, this will by nature contain some spoilers, so I will timestamp every book or series and author that I'm talking about, so you can just try to dodge to the next one if there's something that you are worried about being spoiled for. I'm not planning to talk about any plot twists or major plot elements that don't have to do with the romances, but even so, if you're trying to avoid being spoiled for something, just use your own discretion. Also, it seems worth mentioning, even though I definitely didn't do it on purpose, I noticed after I made this list of least favorite couples and romances that a lot of these books are written by men, and a lot of my favorite couples and romances were from books written by women, and I'm not going to draw any larger conclusions from that, but you can draw your own. So first, I'll be talking about The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I haven't reread this book for a few years, but this is still one of my all-time favorite books. I've talked about it a lot before. It's a really special book to me, and I read it for the first time when I was 17. It was an age where I hadn't been reading a lot of fantasy for a couple of years because there wasn't much that was appealing to me, and I think it was just kind of an awkward period in terms of what kind of fantasy was being written at the time. So reading The Name of the Wind really drew me back into the fantasy genre, and I still really love the book for that reason. I'll probably always love it for that reason, and I think that Patrick Rothfuss is overall a really good writer. And when I was 17, I was even less interested in reading romance in books than I am now. Actually, maybe it was about the same. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't really think about the romance in the book when I read it, but now I have to say that Kvothe and Denna are one of my least favorite couples in science fiction and fantasy. Also, another reason this probably didn't really register when I first read the book is that I was about the same age as the characters, and I also read the book when I was at summer camp, which is like a feeding ground for bad relationships and unhealthy relationship dynamics. So it seemed pretty normal to me that Kvothe would be kind of obsessed with this girl that just doesn't treat him very well. I feel like a lot of the relationships in this video are going to boil down to be with somebody that treats you nicely. But, that wouldn't make very good literature, would it? And people are bad at that anyway in real life. So I just think that Kvothe and Denna have a horrible relationship dynamic. It's not very well explained why he even likes her. She's constantly disappearing, and I'm sure there are more examples that I could come up with why this relationship just isn't good, except that it's been too long since I read the book. But it's something that a lot of people that don't like the book complain about pretty constantly, and even though I like the book, I don't think that this is really a paragon of what a romance should be. I think that Kvothe is kind of holding up Denna as, she's sort of the woman with a capital W. I think that's from Sherlock Holmes, actually. But she is just, for kind of mysterious reasons, the one girl that he ever looks at, and he's just obsessed with her, and their relationship is kind of weird. On the other hand, it does seem pretty normal to me that a teenage boy would fixate to this degree, so I don't know. I'm also genuinely curious to find out, if we ever get book 3, what the heck is actually going on with Denna and what her situation is, because obviously she has more going on in her storyline than just being this sort of manic pixie dream girl who randomly disappears. My next example is also one from a book that I haven't read in a really long time, but I'm going to be talking about the Gentle and Bastards series by Scott Lynch. This is The Lies of Locke Lamora and its sequels. I hear a lot of people on BookTube talk about how good the friendship between Locke and Jean is in The Lies of Locke Lamora and that series, and that's really true. But Locke has this relationship with Sabbatha that really makes no sense. You basically don't even see her. Maybe you see her in flashbacks, but I'm not even sure. But he's just obsessed with her to the exclusion of any other female, and it's apparently been like this since they were younger, and she doesn't even turn up until book 3. And then I've only read book 3 once compared to the first 2, which I read a few more times, but I don't even remember her being that great in book 3. I feel like she was kind of annoying and definitely didn't treat him well, and you just want to tell the guy to move on already. What is it with these fictional men that just have these long-term obsessions with people that don't treat them well and just ignore them and aren't into them? I don't get it. Is this a thing that happens in real life?
Sometimes.
Okay, I mean, this can happen to women too, but it's not a good relationship dynamic for anyone, and these just shouldn't be the ideals of relationships in fiction that we hold up. I mean, dating all the way back to the ideas of like chivalry and courtly love, which was just the stupidest thing ever. The idea is basically, if she loves you back, it's not real love because you're sort of defined by your slavish devotion to this person who, she might deign to give you her handkerchief to put on your shield in a tournament, but you're never going to have a real relationship. And if it was a real relationship, that wouldn't be love anymore. Anyway, this is definitely a case where a character like Sabitha is built up to be this great love of his, the one woman that he cares about. But when she shows up, for me, I was like, she's fine, but I don't see it. And I never really see it when a character is built up to be another character's obsession. Usually as the reader, you look at them and it just doesn't live up to it. To be fair, that's true in real life too, when sometimes your friend starts dating someone and they just can't stop talking about how great they are, and you look at them and you sort of see that they're fine. Okay, my next example is going to be from the Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. This is not a favorite series of mine by any means. I don't think I'm a huge V.E. Schwab person. I definitely didn't care for The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but I'm not going to talk about the romance in that because I hated the book. But I generally enjoyed the Shades of Magic series, especially the first one, but the whole thing was basically a fun fantasy trilogy. If you really like fantasy and you're looking for a fun, fluffy read, I definitely think that the Shades of Magic trilogy is worth picking up. So the whole trilogy kind of built towards this relationship between Kel and Lila in the last book, and even though I overall liked both characters as individual characters, especially Kel, Lila kind of annoyed me a little bit. I just could not buy them in a relationship. Every time they had a scene together, it fell completely flat. It made me stop liking the third book, and it made me not like the relationship either. And I don't know what about that relationship just was so bad for me, but it just almost actually turned me off. I can't remember very many times where I have been so resistant to reading about two characters in a relationship, and I can't even quite tell you why, other than I think they'd just be both better off on their own. There was actually a secondary romance in the series between Prince Rai, or however you say his name, and Alucard, I think his name was, and I actually thought their relationship was overall pretty sweet, and I liked that one a lot better. I mean, it had plenty about it that was just a little bit messed up, but mostly it was just a typical dose of misunderstandings and miscommunication. And maybe my problem with the Kel-Lila thing was that I did like Kel more as a character, and Lila's storyline just drove me a bit bananas throughout the whole trilogy. There's this huge reveal about her in book 3 that honestly I think I saw coming from the second paragraph after she has been introduced. So yeah. Okay, so next I'll be talking about The Lord of the Rings, and this is going to fall a little bit probably into the unpopular opinions category. And also I feel like I'm being a little bit of a hypocrite because I can't really say that I hate this relationship. It's more just a symptom of the role of women in Tolkien in general. I just don't really like Aragorn and Arwen because it just isn't a very satisfying relationship. I feel kind of uncomfortable with the fact that all the women in The Lord of the Rings, well, they're either basically non-existent, or they're Éowyn, who has, a cool storyline, or they're like Arwen, who's basically just a prize. And yeah, it is really touching that she's willing to give up her immortality to be with Aragorn. Behind the scenes, it's all great and fantastic, but like their actual love story isn't even basically in the book, it's in an appendix. And so I guess this more just comes from my wish that there were more female characters in Lord of the Rings and that the ones that there are had more roles. I don't mind that this thing is a product of its time. It's based on classical literature and mythology. It's not going to make me stop liking The Lord of the Rings. A case where I kind of like some of the changes the movie made to give Arwen a little bit more of a role, even if it ended up deviating a little bit more from the books. Also, to be fair, when I first became obsessed with the Lord of the Rings movies, when I was like, I think I was around 12 probably, and I thought the kissing scenes were pretty icky at that point, but at that point I didn't really care about female representation, but I do now, and I understand why the filmmakers made those changes, and they make sense to me. So next, we're going to have the requisite Brandon Sanderson example, because this is a list video, and I've said before, every time I make a list, I need at least one example from Brandon Sanderson. This time I'm going to be talking about a relationship in the third Mistborn book, Hero of Ages, and that is Spook and Beldre. Honestly, my biggest problem here is that I just don't enjoy reading the Spook point of view, and the Spook arc in Hero of Ages is probably my least favorite arc in the entire story, except, I do get kind of annoyed at Sazed sometimes when he's just super depressed and reading through religions, but the ending of that one is just so good. And actually the payoff for Spook is really good too. I think the arc is interesting. It's just, I don't like the character at all in this book. He kind of annoyed me in Well of Ascension too. He's just not my favorite character in general. And there's really basically no basis for his relationship with Beldre. He kind of gets obsessed with her when he's spying on her brother, and he basically likes her because she is sad and beautiful. And that is pretty fair. He is a teenage boy, but then it's implied that they go on to have a relationship later, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also absolutely nothing right with it either. I don't see much in the book that really is there for us to like the relationship. It basically just seems convenient. I think it would have been just fine if this romance hadn't taken place in the book. And yeah, it did have plot, reasons, and the plot reasons made sense, and they were good, and the reveals were exciting, and it worked as a story, but just as a relationship, there's not really chemistry between those two characters. You don't really buy their relationship. I don't know, it just never really worked for me. The last relationship I'm going to talk about is from the Lighbringer series by Brent. This is also a series that I liked it, but I've only, I think, read the first 2 books. But my husband really likes this series, and he read all 5. I don't know, I just stopped reading after 2. I don't even really know why, because I liked the first book a lot, and then I think I just wasn't super excited about where the story was going. But the relationship between Gavin Gyle and Karis White Oak, I just feel so conflicted about. And I kind of know how things end up in this series. I have looked up / discussed the spoilers, but I don't know, this relationship, I'm kind of rooting for it when I read the first 2 books, but also I just want Karis to run far, far away from this entire series, because I feel like she doesn't deserve to be in these books, and she's just stuck in this terrible situation. And a lot of the stuff that's wrong with the relationship isn't really the relationship, it's just everything else Gavin is and has done. But even so, I just think she should leave. So maybe that's unfair, because I think they have a history and they genuinely care about each other. But even so, this is a case where it's like when you see a friend and you just want to tell them to just get out of that relationship. That's how I feel a little bit about Karis, even though I also like Gavin as a character and wanted him to end up happy, and I kind of wanted them to end up happy together, but I also just thought everyone in that series was super messed up, and that's just how it goes. So those are some of my least favorite romances and couples. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Are any of these your favorites? Did I just trash on some of your favorite relationships, or what are your least favorites? Let me know.